Hi everyone. So this is a small class on embroidery stitches. It is part of the surface and texture manipulation module. So let's start with it. Embroidery is an ancient form of needlework that has been used worldwide to embellish textiles for decorative and communicative purposes. In terms of form and aesthetics, embroidery may add color, texture, richness, dimensions used on clothing. It may reveal the wearer's wealth, social status, ethnic identity, systems of belief. Typically, embroidery is executed in threads of cotton, wool, silk, or linen, but may also incorporate other materials such as beads, quills, metal, shells, feathers. Some materials, techniques, and stitches occur across many cultures, while others are specific to a region. There are two images that I have put on this slide, which shows different kinds of stitches and how a look can be created using a combination of different stitches. So in this video we will be learning about 5 basic stitches. Let's get on to the next slide where we will talk. In everyday language, a stitch in the context of embroidery or hand sewing is defined as the movement of the embroidery needle from the backside of the fabric to the front side. Back to the back side. The thread stroke on the front side produced by this is called a stitch. Here we will be talking about 5 basic popular stitches which are extensively used in decorative embroidery. First of which is running stitch. The running stitch offers a quick way to outline a design. There are two methods you can use. First is the sewing method. Simply weave the needle and floss through the fabric in one continuous motion to create several stitches at once, as if you are sewing a seam. The second is the punch and poke and stabbing method. Push the needle through the fabric to the back and then poke it through the front or short distance away, creating a stitch at a time. For example, you can see on the next slide, this is a example of a running stitch. It is basically the very basic stitch, and as you can see, the needle has been sewn through the fabric in this flower motif, and you can see that it is just a basic running through of a needle in one direction, and which creates multiple stitches at a time. Backstitch. Backstitch is great when you need a solid line, when you are creating outlines or hand embroidered letters. Begin by pulling the needle and floss up through the fabric and do not stitch forward. From underneath, space the needle out the length of your desired stitch. Pull up through the fabric and bring the needle and floss back down to the end of the previous stitch. So it sounds a little technical, but when you go on the next slide, you can see how it can be done. And it is very simple. As you can see, I've given you a little guideline of how to do it, so you can practice it at home. Split stitch. Similar to the back stitch, the split stitch creates a solid line, but its braided texture is all its own. The stitch is another good option for text outlines, but also works well for filling in designs. To begin, pull your needle and floss up through the fabric and create one straight stitch. With your needle and floss on the other side of your hoop, bring the needle up through the center of the stitch you just created. Stitch forward the same length as your initial stitch. Repeat by bringing the needle up through the center of each stitch. You can see on the next slide how this can be done. It actually looks like a braid because every stitch is created by poking through the previous stitch in the center of the previous stitch and going forward. So it creates like a braid kind of effect. It is always very good for, as I've told you earlier, it is good for outlining, filling of area, some broad like bold lines that you want to give in your design. So split stitch is a very good way to highlight or maybe outline a certain design. Satin stitch. When you're creating hearts or filling in leaves, it's likely you want the design to have a smooth appearance. That's where the stitch comes in. It adds a nice raised texture and gets the job done super fast. First, draw out the shape you want to fill to use a guide. With your needle and floss, create one stitch that extends from one end of the shape to the other. Bring the needle up again, just next to the opposite side of the initial stitch. Keep the stitches close to one another as required to fill the pattern or design you are working with. As you can see on this slide, this is this is the technique how you do a satin stitch. On this image, you can see how satin stitch has been used to fill big spaces, and it also gives it a little texture, a raised texture. It is a very commonly used stitch in embroidery wherever you need to fill any spaces or any particular motif. Handmade embroidery stitches, which is French knots. This decorative stitch makes a pretty accent design throughout your project. You'll even need two hands to pull it off. But don't worry, it's not tough. First, bring the needle and floss up through the fabric, then wrap the floss around the needle twice. Hold the end of the floss and bring the needle down just next to the space where it came through the fabric. Keep holding the floss tightly as you pull the needle through. You can vary the size of your French knot by wrapping the floss around the needle anywhere between 1 to 3 times, or maybe it can be more also if you need a bigger knot. Here is an example of how a flower is made out of a silk floss using French knots. And here you can see a chain stitch kind of effect is given to achieve a leaf. This is a method. You can follow this method step by step. There are 5 steps given on this slide so that you can easily achieve different sizes of a French knot. So let's all practice these 5 stitches at home and get a little better at doing it. And these are very basic and commonly used stitches which can easily be used in your projects and your assignments which have been given to you regularly during this lockdown. And so I hope you like this, and if you have any doubts, you are always free to contact me. You have my number and email ID. So I hope you enjoy it, and next time we will be covering another 5 to 6 stitches, which are also basic stitches commonly used everywhere worldwide to achieve embroidery designs. Thank you.